Today, we are going to be talking about annotations, which is one of the single most important skills you can have in an English classroom. Annotations are used for many different purposes, but before we get into that, let's just get started. First, in your digital notebook on the page number that I gave to you at the beginning of class, work with this quick write. When you read a novel for school, what is your process for keeping track of information, actions, characters, etc.? Think about all of the things that you might have to do for a project. Think about all the things that you might have for a test. How do you keep track of all that information? If you do not have a specific process for keeping track of that information, you can write about why you don't have one, or consider what might actually be a good process to use. Here's a hint though. Writing down, I don't do anything because I just remember it, isn't quite going to cut it. Actually, think about this. I'd like you to write for 2 to 3 minutes. I'm not going to stand here in the video and just have silence for 2 to 3 minutes. So hit the pause button, go to your digital notebook, write out for 2 to 3 minutes about this, and then come on back and hit play again. Did you do it? Did you hit pause? Come on, hit pause. Okay, I trust that you actually did it. So let's go through and start talking about what annotations actually are. They're this. Annotations, notate, is like where the word comes from. It's making notes on a particular text. So annotations come in many different forms. It can be writing on the text. It's like you're having a conversation and talking to the text, whether it's a song or a book or an article. Either way, the purpose of this is to construct meaning for yourself, to make it so that you are not as confused about something that could be potentially complicated. Just think about it. Have you ever read something and not been able to explain it or talk about it after you read it? I know you have. You've been in school for this long. There has to be a time when that has happened. Annotation is a way to make sure that does not happen again. So why annotate? Why not just remember it with your remembering brain? Well, it forces readers, you, to slow down to actually understand what's going on. Instead of rushing through to try to get done by the end of the hour, it gives you that opportunity to talk to the writer and give your own opinions on stuff. I'm not necessarily worried about why the curtain was blue on page 36. I want to know what you thought about this thing that the character did. Annotation is a way for you to do that. It also gives you an opportunity to have notes built in. So if you have your own notes about what this meant and what your opinion was, you don't have to go back through and reread anything. You can just reread your notes instead of realizing 3 pages down the line that you were actually thinking about dinner and not thinking about the pages that were in front of you. All you have to do is reread your notes. So now that we know what annotation is, how do you actually do it? Well, there are just as many different methods as there are people in the world. No 2 ways are going to be the exact same. Here on this slide are the top 4. There's highlighting and color coding, using different symbols, writing in the margins, and using Post-its. In this particular class, we're going to be focusing on the last 2 the most often, but I'm sure you will find another system that is going to work for you. Here's an example of highlighting and color coding. Different symbols. This is one that younger kids tend to use a little bit more. And if you are a person that does not think that you are good at writing or you think that it takes too much time, symbols might be a good place to start. Notice I say start, not end. Writing in the margins, just that. And then Post-its. So with all of these different methods, how should you do it? I can't tell you that. You have to find the system that works best for you within reason. And the within reason is you have to show that you are thoughtfully and meaningfully engaging with the text. In fact, as a teacher, when I look at annotations, that is what I am looking at. If you do something similar to this, you're not going to get too much going on with that because those underlines don't mean anything. Like, why did they underline the author's names? And I agree. Good point. You can put that in with any text ever, and it would make just as much sense as it does with this one, meaning it makes no sense whatsoever. Make sure that you are doing something specific to that text. Make meaning with it. Don't just make this something that your English teacher is telling you to do, but make it something that will actually help you in the long run. Avoid this. Do this. Now, let's talk about some of the things that strong annotations can actually do. This is a list of them. If you are in person, there is a bulletin board in the back of the room that's an annotation board. It says, do this, not that. And that also lists out a bunch of different things that annotations can do. But for the purposes of this particular lesson, let me just go through and talk about these really quickly. First, annotations can notice and comment on things, whether it's literary devices, it could be noticing a character doing something out of the ordinary. And what you would do in that annotation is kind of analyze it, break it down a little bit. Why is that there? The author included it for a reason. They were not just like vomiting words onto the page. What were they trying to say? Here's an example. Notice that annotation is not like 3 words. It's like 2 sentences. You want to go a little bit deeper with your annotations. Another thing that annotations do a lot is ask a question. And you're asking the author, why the heck did you put this here? Or why was this a good idea? How did you accomplish this? You're more asking why and how, thicker, deeper questions than you are the what. But for this to be a really thoughtful annotation, you want to go a little bit further and attempt to answer your own question. Why did the author put that there? It might be because blah. And here's an example. Notice how the answer is in there. Maybe they moved because they didn't have a lot of money and got kicked out of their house. It's not saying that is exactly what it is, but it's saying just maybe. Annotations can also discuss confusion. If you are going through a very difficult text, you can say, this is super confusing to me. I don't know what's happening, as long as you talk about it a little bit deeper. This is confusing is not enough. If you talk about why it's confusing, it's perfect. Again, another example. Another thing that annotations can do is make connections. Think about the typical text-to-text connections, text-to-life connections, text-to-self connections, or anything else. But remember, whenever you're doing these, a text does not have to be a book. It does not have to be an article. A text can be the most recent Marvel movie or the thing that you watched on Disney Plus last weekend. Any connections that you make are pretty legit. And an example, and if you look at this one, there's an explanation. It can't just be like, oh, this reminded me of Iron Man. It goes a little bit deeper than that. Annotations can also predict, what do you think is going to happen next? What do you think's going on? And as long as you explain it a little bit further, so you're kind of thinking on the page, it's perfect. Annotations can also clarify, which is basically making more clear to answer questions that happened earlier. So if you ask questions at the first couple chapters of a book and you're finding the answers later, that is the perfect time to write an annotation because you have the answers to the things that were confusing you earlier. And finally, annotations can also reflect. You use them to think about the world, to think about your own life, to think about anything. It could be about style. It could be about meaning. It can be about how, like, the country is connected to this book because everything's slightly scary right now and nobody knows what's going on. It's a perfect way to kind of get through your feelings as well as tackle the text. And I said finally earlier. I evidently didn't mean finally. This is something else that annotations can do. Evaluate everybody's favorite hobby, judging people. Why did this idiot do this? They should have done blah, 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 blah. Man, this author did not know how to write poetry because I prefer when blah, 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 blah. That is also something that annotations can do. Personally, it's one of my favorites because I find myself getting kind of judgmental when I'm reading some books sometimes. And if it's yours, perfect time to put it in annotation. If not, don't do this one. Do reflection or something else. And that one was actually the last one. Tomorrow, we are going to practice actually making some annotations, and I'm going to make a tutorial for you on how to annotate digitally, because in the world that we're in right now, we cannot necessarily use paper as much as we would like to. So that is it as far as annotations for right now. Make sure you got those notes in your digital notebook. Make sure you got that quick write done. Go back to that quick write if you didn't do it before. And we will talk about how to actually logistically do annotations tomorrow.